Good morning, Mr. Depp.
Good morning.
Yes. When did Ms. Heard's behavior towards you begin to change?
First things started coming up, and I was suddenly just wrong about everything. If you tried to explain yourself and correct the problem, the misunderstanding, it would then begin to heighten as Ms. Heard was unable to be wrong. It just didn't happen. She couldn't be wrong. It would commence with sort of demeaning, name-calling, berated, sort of to be made a fool of, and those would escalate into a full-scale argument. And in the beginning, as one does, one sticks up for oneself in a debate, as it were, or an argument over something to try to prove the point. But when it escalates, and then it's hard to explain, but the argument would start here, and then it would roll around and become this circular thing of its own. So you get back to the beginning, essentially, of the argument. Now it's heightened even more, but it's still circular, and there's no way in or out. If there's a dialogue between two people, both people need to speak, but there was no way to fit a word in. It was a sort of a rapid fire, sort of endless parade of insults, and I was confused as to the fact that whatever her age was at the time of these various arguments, she was mid-20s to late 20s and into 30s. I couldn't understand how I had somehow arrived at where I'd arrived from where I came from in the beginning of my life, and worked for 30 plus years doing these things. It was astounding how wrong I was about everything that I'd experienced within the movie, within the film industry, or in just life itself. No, I was sort of not allowed to be right, not allowed to have a voice. So at a certain point, when what enters your mind is, you start to slowly realize that you are in a relationship with your mother, in a sense. And I know that sounds perverse and obtuse, but the fact is that some people search for weaknesses in people. That is to say, sensitivities. And when you've told that person your life and what you've lived through and what you've been through, just as happens in relationships, the more that became ammunition for Ms. Heard to either verbally decimate me or to send me into a kind of tailspin of confusion and depression, and it's not a happy day. It's not a happy week. It's not a happy month when you're constantly being told how wrong you are about this or that, what an idiot you are, or anything. It just then it increased, and it became an endless. It became that endless circle. Like, so as it escalated and continued to escalate, I went straight to what I had learned as a youth, which was to remove myself from the situation so that it couldn't continue, because there's only so much your ears can hear and never forget. So I would remove myself from the situation, as I'd done as a youth, as much as possible. So I certainly didn't believe that there was any need for these various subjects or arguments to come up and travel the distance that they did so very quickly, to ramp up so fast. So I found the only way to find any sort of peace was to try to walk away. If she didn't allow me to walk away, there were times when I would just go and lock myself in, the bathroom or anywhere that she couldn't get into, and that happened constantly over the years.
What would happen when the fights would escalate, other than going and hiding in the bathroom?
I'm sorry? What would happen? Well, if they continued to escalate, if I continued to try to present my version or my side of the story, well, when you're approached with such anger and hatred, it seemed like pure hatred for me. If I stayed to argue that, eventually I was sure that it was going to escalate into violence, and oftentimes it did. Many times it did.
And when you say violence, what are you referring to specifically?
Miss Heard, in her frustration and in her rage and her anger, she would strike out. She would. It could begin with a slap. It could begin with a shove. It could begin with, throwing a TV remote at my head. It could be throwing a glass of wine in my face. But all in all, it was just it was a constant. There was a built-in list of as I said, my personal experiences, which I gave to Miss Heard, those things were, those facts were used against me as weapons, especially when it came to my kids. Too many lines were crossed. You couldn't see the lines anymore.
You mentioned that Ms. Heard would use information you gave her against you like a weapon. Can you explain that a little bit?
The only ambition that I've ever had in my life arrived the second that my first child arrived. And in the instant, which was to be a good parent, to be a great father, to be the best father I could. And there were several occasions where Miss Heard would tell me what a bad father I was, and that I had no idea how to parent. And again, it falls into the same category as before. I couldn't understand how in 52 years, or however old I was at the time, how I could be so wrong about everything. I mean, one learns along the road. The result of the road is not important. It's the road that's important, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen in 10 years. We don't know. So the road is what I pay attention to, and paying attention to trying to spend as much time with my children as possible. Even that would that could send Miss Heard into a monumental tailspin, where I could hardly ever go and see my kids and spend time with my kids, because she had to have me there at all times for her own needs. Once you realize that that's happening, and then there are hassles between the children and her, the situation starts to get a little more grim and a little more dire. And that I was not prepared to take. I would not hear the words, "You're a bad father, you're a terrible father, you're an awful father." So one can only take so much of that before bits of your brain start to just, bits of your brain, bits of your heart begin to, the valve gets shut off, because you can't hear it anymore. And you know that it's not true, and you know that it's meant as a weapon. It's to slice you up, it's to bring you down, it's to demean you, it's to bring you into a place where you start to believe that there's something wrong with you. There's plenty wrong with me. There's plenty wrong with a lot of people. But in all of these situations, my main goal was to retreat, because I think in life, most important is pick your battles. If there's a battle to be fought that it's grave and important, then that must be dealt with. But small insults and kind of teenage sort of high school tactics, this bullying, if you will, was becoming too much to take.
So why did you stay with Ms. Heard given this type of behavior?
That's a very complicated answer. I'm sure that it's somehow related to my father remaining stoic as my mother would beat him to death. I'm sure it had a lot to do with having been in a beautiful, wonderful 14, 15-year relationship with Vanessa, the mother of my children. I don't know what her motivations were, if there was some species of jealousy, or there was some species of maybe just hatred. I don't know. But in any case, the elevation and the escalation of these day-to-day arguments were simply unnecessary. It was not to help the relationship. It did not help the relationship. It wasn't meant to help the relationship. It was meant to feed her need for conflict. She has a need for conflict. She has a need for violence. It erupts out of nowhere, and Ms. Heard had spoken of suicide on a couple of occasions, so that also becomes a factor. That's also something that always lives in the back of your brain, and that you fear. Many times when I would try to leave, she would, stop me at the elevator with the security guards, crying, screaming, I can't live without you. I'm gonna die. But you had to get out. There were even a couple of times when I did escape and I got to my house, arrived at my house in Sweetser, and then 5 minutes later she would arrive in the I don't know what car she was driving at the time, but she would arrive in her nightgown screaming in the parking lot in front of my house, screaming to high heavens. It'd be 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning. It was out of control. It was uncontrollable.
Did there come a time when you and Ms. Heard started recording your arguments?
Yes. In fact, I was the first person of the two of us to record conversations. And it was for this reason. We would have been talking the night before or arguing the night before, and she would say something. There would be these demeaning, berating insults. There would be these jabs. There would be anything to make me feel small and like nothing. So what I thought was, I'm going to record the conversation. And I told her this. I'm going to record. I'm going to get my phone and I'm going to record our conversation because I want you to hear what you've said to me tomorrow. So that because she would deny having said those things. Well, it was clear that she was performing for the tape because it was being recorded.
What did Ms. Heard say to you about you recording the conversations between you and her?
I mean, initially she said, sure, go ahead.
Did that ever change?
No, then then she started recording, but surreptitious, without telling me that she was recording something, which is fine, but not so fine, if you know what I mean. Violence is unnecessary. Why would you hit someone to make them agree with you? I don't think it works.
When you used the term monster, what were you referring to?
I mean, she had told me many times that the monster was only me when I was using drugs and alcohol. Even when I was stone cold sober off of alcohol and substances aside from my meds, the term the monster was still there. It was in her mind, not mine.